We'll hear next from Mary Hawkins from the National Disability Insurance Scheme, the National Disability Insurance Agency. Mary is currently the Director, Engagement Employment Outcomes in the National Disability Insurance Agency. Mary is a qualified rehabilitation counsellor who has occupied senior management positions in WorkCover New South Wales, the Motor Accident Authority of New South Wales, and with CRS, a large national provider of vocational rehabilitation services. Mary has held a number of roles with the NDIA, including setting up arrangements for providers for the commencement of the trials of the scheme in 2013, assisting with the rollout of the early transition of the NDIS in the Nepean Blue Mountains in New South Wales. With the commencement of the transition to full scheme in New South Wales, Mary worked as Director, Stakeholder Engagement for the New South Wales Central Region. More recently, as Director, Strategic Initiatives Provider and Market Engagement, Mary has assisted with transition in Western Australia. And with the introduction of the disability-related health supports in accordance with the decision of the Disability Reform Council in 2019. Professionally, Mary received the inaugural award for outstanding contribution to injury management by an individual from the Personal Injury Education Foundation in 2008, and for many years was a significant contributor to their education and events subcommittees. Mary was made a Fellow of the Australian Society of Rehabilitation Counsellors, having been one of the founding members of that society. Her work in rehabilitation counselling, particularly in injury and disability management, was recognised by the University of Sydney's Faculty of Health Sciences, who granted her the Alumni Award for Services to Humanity. It's my pleasure to introduce Mary Hawkins, and I'll hand over now to you, Mary.
Great, thank you very much, Alicia, and good afternoon, everybody. I think we're going to have the slides shared. Just to bring your notice to that initial statement that's up there, it's about privacy. Given the nature of these virtual seminars and conferences, it's really important that nobody posts any personal individual details, and that if you do want to do follow up on a personal issue, that you do so directly with the agency, but please don't share it with others. But happy for you to de-identify and present it as a subject for consideration. So happy for that. So we'll just, first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the owners and custodians of the land that I'm presenting from, who are the Darug people, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and into the future. And welcome all Aboriginal and Torres Strait people here today. Torres Strait Islander people, I should say. So let's go through. I'm going to run through it fairly quickly so that you've got plenty of time for your favourite question, and hopefully I can answer it. I based my talk today on the operational guideline that we released very recently on work and study. So you'll be able to go and refer to that on our website. And the final slide gives you all the links to all of our website documents. So I'm going to run you through, first of all, the context that we're talking about, then to talk a bit about the principles of funding within the NDIS, what we can fund to support students with disability during their period of study, what we are also able to fund in relation to employment, and then also talking about getting ready for planning meetings. That is so important for you to help students to actually make sure they come to their planning meetings well prepared. And we have recently had a bit of a look at how we might assist participants to select providers. So that's also now available. So we encourage people with disability, and students in particular, to choose the pathway to study and also through to employment that actually suits them. And I agree wholeheartedly with the conversation that was just held about the still low level of aspiration for that many students still have, and one of the an area of focus over the next year will to be working closely with the state and territory education service systems and with providers to actually help build the aspirational goals for young people with disability, and then to also work with the education providers, and also the other providers of disability support, so that people get the right assistance. Are we moving the slides on? Because I noticed that it's yes, we really do need to move on. Okay,
Mary, it's David. You'll
yes.
need to let me know when you'd like to move.
Oh, okay, fine. We'll do that. Yes, sorry, I didn't realise that. So as you can see there, we're listing all the varieties of opportunities that young people may have, but remembering that as an NDIS participant, a person can get specific assistance through the funding in their plan to actually complement what they're able to access through mainstream services. So moving on, the mainstream services, as moving the slide on, as you would expect, we can't fund anything that is provided by a mainstream service. And mainstream services, the general definition is they're available to all Australians. So they're not disability specific. Everyone can use them, but for our participants, they may need particular assistance to be able to access and make the most of those opportunities. And so that will be the extra support that a participant needs because of their disability that is not generally funded through the mainstream services. So next slide, and then move quickly on to the next one. So what supports can we actually fund? So we can fund any supports that will help a young person to move from school to further study, and that may be, for example, assessments and counselling to help them select what they're able to do. The help to actually build some basic work skills. Anything that is not available through disability employment services, in the context in which we're talking, a disability employment service is considered a mainstream service, and that's in relation to finding and keeping a job. We can fund, for example, a disability support worker or an allied health professional to actually provide training to teachers or work colleagues about a participant's disability and the particular support that they may need in that setting. We fund personal care during work or study. And we're also able to provide some assistance towards the cost of travelling when a person is unable to use public transport because of their disability. So moving a slide on as to what we don't usually fund. So we can't fund anything that is, as I said earlier, the responsibility of another person or organisation. So we're not funding the modifications to the premises of an employer or a study institution. We don't fund the textbooks or computers. We don't generally fund staff supervision or any of the usual costs of undertaking courses. And anything that, if a person is working, anything that an employer is legally obliged to provide, be it part of their business or part of their work health and safety obligations, we can't fund that. Unfortunately, we're not unable to fund startup costs for a business or any general training that's required for all employees and anything available through the DES provider. So moving on, and we'll move on to the next one. So we have to make decisions under our legislation, which is the NDIS Act 2013, and it comes under the general banner of reasonable and necessary. And this just gives a summary of the consideration that we have, our planners and our delegates have to make. We must be able to see the link between a person's goal and what they are asking for in their plan. So those of you who are helping students to formulate their requests to us for their planning meetings, think about that. What is their goal and what is it that will help them overcome the effect of their disability and help them reach that goal? It must be considered effective, and it must, as far as we are able to establish, it must be beneficial to that individual in meeting their goal. And it must obviously be legal, safe, and then it also must represent value for money. So we do have to give consideration to the economics of what it is we're being asked to fund. So this is our local area coordinators. Sorry about all the jargon that we utilise in this agency, the LAC or planner. And so they will be considering whether there are other supports that will help achieve that same outcome at a lower cost. Now, I do just want to explain that. We don't go just for the most or the cheapest item or support. We are looking at an outcome and what is the relatively lower cost of whatever is under consideration. The supports are intended to help the participant in the long term so we can invest. So unlike the old state-funded disability services, we are able to think about the person's long term because a participant is with us for their lifetime. So if we can see that there'll be a cost benefit, later on, we will be able to invest in that item or that service. And we're particularly looking at ensuring that that a participant can become more socially and economically independent and perhaps reduce future support needs. So if we can get someone to get a qualification to then help them to actually pursue a career, that is a much better outcome than helping them just to take any job on leaving school, as you can imagine. So moving on, getting our slide moving. So what can we fund in relation to university TAFE and apprentices? You'll all be interested in this. We can fund anything that's actually going to enable a person to overcome the effect of their disability and participate alongside their peers. So personal care, very clearly we would do that. Transport, if they're unable to drive or use public transport. Training for staff at any of the institutions or an employer that they may be undertaking a placement with that will actually help them understand what the person's needs might be whilst they're studying or undertaking a placement. And also any specific projects that are part of their university or TAFE course that will actually help a person with disability to be better prepared to undertake their study. Okay, so then moving on. We cannot fund anything that is considered a reasonable adjustment by the tertiary institution, which does obviously include any physical accommodation to buildings, etc. We can't. We also won't fund any changes to learning materials, and we won't provide funds for the textbooks or general equipment or for course fees. So speaking to a local area coordinator or to a support coordinator will really assist a participant to understand better what is available through the NDIS, apart from what's on our website. So moving on, school responsibility, very similar. Anything that's part of the usual educational support that's available is not funded through the NDIS. And all education services have signed off on the rights of students with disabilities, so they have to provide regional adjustment for their students with disability. But we are looking to make sure that students with disability have the same opportunities and the schools also have that responsibility. So moving on. So we can fund additional support to that the schools can actually provide. So that might be special training for teachers. This is often used with young pupils who actually will have a therapist go in to a classroom and assist the teaching and learning support staff to know more about a person's disability and how they can best help that young student. Personal care and also school transport is actually provided, it's allowed for in a participant's plan. It's not actually paid through an individual plan, but rather it's an agreement between the agency and each of the state and territory education departments. So it's a behind the scenes payment, if you like. Any additional support a student might need when they're undertaking work experience, or anything that is about in relation to a school-based traineeship, so we don't discriminate between those. Moving on. And then what we don't fund. So it's very similar to what we don't fund in the tertiary sector, so but important just to know that. And the general term that you may hear in relation to that is that this is an everyday living expense, because every person in the community is expected to fund these things. So moving on. And I'll move very quickly because we are time is starting to go. NDIS funded employment supports, you've probably all seen something along these lines before, but basically we are wanting our participants to aspire to work. So we will be over the next coming years and actually working much more closely with the education departments and with health professionals and other support providers to actually help young people orient themselves to that life beyond school and to think about employment as a realistic goal. Then once they get to the time when they're actually looking at what they might be able to do in relation to employment, actually helping them to get into and then to retain a job. And as time goes on, we would like to see people with disability having the same career pathways as all other Australians are able to enjoy. And we've heard a few stories, we're hearing those comments in the earlier session. So moving on. And so that just is a different conceptualisation of the types of support that are available. That little box in the corner on the right is new. It's a new form of funding, and I'll explain that in a moment. It's called Supports in Employment, and that is a new employment support now available. So moving on to the next slide. And now this is employment-related assessment and counselling. This is where we will pay for a person to undertake relevant assessments and also to receive assistance to actually make some goals about employment and about the best pathways towards that employment goal. So that's available. Moving on. School leaver employment support. So we are right now focusing on making sure that all school leavers of 2020 actually have plans in place that will help them to actually participate in training and employment preparation post-school. So we're working hard with our service delivery people to make sure we haven't missed anyone. Moving on to the next slide. And there's a lot of emphasis goes on school leavers in the agency, because we do want young people to continue that pathway towards employment, rather than sitting at home not knowing what to do. And even if they start off on very minimal activity or just trying to try and test various options, that's absolutely fine, but we just want young people appropriately engaged in thinking towards an employment outcome. Moving on, and I'll just skip over this one if you don't mind and move to the next one. The next one is about supports in employment. This is a new support that is now became available as of the 1st of July, and this is where we can actually provide on-the-job support to a participant with disability. Initially, it will mainly be used in the payment of people who are employees of Australian Disability Enterprises or ADEs, but ultimately it will be available to any participant within any type of workplace for the assistance that they need to actually learn how to do the job and how to then continue doing the job well so that they retain the job. Okay, moving on. Preparing for planning meetings. The next slide, please. There is a thinking about work booklet. Yes, we can move on this slide. And it's called Let's Talk About Work. It can be used to think about goals in relation to further education as well as employment. So it's an important activity that every young person should be encouraged to undertake in the last couple of years of school, even if you can't get them to concentrate terribly well in the beginning. As they come up to the end of their school life, they may actually focus a little bit more. So it really is about that exploration time. And it's very useful to have that completed when you come to a planning meeting, which takes us to the next slide. And just in terms of preparing for planning meetings, and most important when they're starting their journey into further education or that first step into employment, but also later on, because there'll become a point where young people are graduating from their tertiary education, and then we have to think about what support they may need to actually get into work post their obtaining their qualification. So bringing the reports that are relevant, anything that is known about their vocational profile and any assessments that have been undertaken, or most importantly, if a person's already coming through their tertiary education, what did their what were their placement reports? What did they say? And certainly, and other people such as a support coordinator or other support staff can assist a young person with that. Okay, just the last slide, and I'm just going to refer to it very briefly. The next one is about selecting a provider. And we have got some resources available on our website now, but we also suggest really doing your research in relation to any provider of any category and talking with others and getting that word of mouth recommendation. And on the final slide that will now appear, there's all the links to our various resources on the website. And I should have said this presentation will be available once we get clearance for publication. But I think that was going up on one of the chats. So I'll leave it there and we'll see if there's any questions I need to answer.
Alicia here, Mary. Thank you for that very informative and detailed presentation. There are, in fact, an enormous volume of questions coming through, and we only have about 5 or 6 minutes to get through some of those. Would you be open to us emailing you the questions that remain unanswered after the presentation?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, probably a good thing to do to record them anyway and get the answers.
Lovely. All right, well, we'll see how we go getting through a few of these. One of the questions that has come through is in-class behaviour support considered personal support or learning support?
It would be learning support generally. However, a behaviour specialist could come into the classroom and assist the teacher and the learning support person, and perhaps even other students, understand how they can actually assist that young student with modifying their behaviour in class.
Thank you. All right, the next question. Would the NDIS also fund extracurricular activities such as social clubs, sports clubs, student unions, and so on? All the activities and engagement that any student could expect to be engaged in during their academic journey?
So I think you've just answered your own question. It's any student would expect to be engaged in, and so the answer is no, that is not a disability related support. That is something that all students, want to actually get engaged in, depending on their interest.
Okay, so building on that question, universities don't usually cover those sorts of activities for example, deaf students who require an interpreter, so they miss out. So would the NDIS cover the disability-related costs associated with those activities, such as interpreters?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Yeah, although I think that interpreters are available, are they not, for learning purposes? Is that correct?
That's right, for learning, but the question is in relation to extracurricular and social.
Yeah, so there's usually some funds available in a person's plan for interpreters for particular activities. So I'm not saying it would be fully funded all of the time, but there will be some assistance available.
Thank you. Okay, another question. Have there been any changes to what technology can be funded after COVID-19, especially now more disability support services are moving online? For example, can personal devices be funded to access online supports?
They are, yeah, they're still being funded at the moment. Whether that will continue or not will depend on a policy decision in the agency. But at this stage, they're still being funded in COVID-affected areas. So you need to refer to our price guide, because there are differences in relation to any COVID-related funding that's now available.
Thanks, Mary. The next question is funding available for career counselling support? And do planners understand the importance of adding this to plans? Many students come to uni with no idea of the career degree they have chosen, or how to manage their disability in the workplace.
Yeah, look, that's an interesting question. Most students actually obtain some kind of career direction whilst they're at school. But for a young person with disability, and I would hope this would happen whilst they're still at school, it may be important for someone with more specialist knowledge to undertake the what I would call a career or vocational assessment, so that they're able to match their knowledge of the person's disability with job requirements, and of course job requirements, go down the line to what kind of course you would actually undertake. So yes, it may be necessary to have a specific assessment undertaken, or it might be that it can just be done through the general career counselling that's available through education. It would vary.
Thanks, Mary. And what about specialist equipment that a registered training organisation would not have, but that a participant could use in employment or other study? Would the NDIS cover those costs?
I'd have to know exactly what it is we're talking about. So it's always got to be disability related, remember? And if it's something that they can use as part of their study, but also use in the community and in a workplace, that should be fine, yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right, there are so many more questions coming through, and I'm just trying to group them into themes. One of the ones that I would like to ask you is, would the NDIS fund psychoeducational assessment for students with specific learning disability moving from high school to university?
I'd say the answer is generally no, but I'd have to understand. I think by the time a person is moving from their secondary school into tertiary study, their needs should be, in terms of how they go about their study, should be pretty well known. I'd need to know something more specific about that one.
Okay, thanks, Mary. Look, we have many more questions, but we are out of time there. So I want to thank you for your presentation today, and we will make sure that all of those questions are sent through to you to answer those that you've not had time for today, but also perhaps if you'd like to check and elaborate on any of your responses so far.